Now it's time to talk about the review process. You have your film assembled, you have a solid draft finished, and now you need to sit down and watch it from start to finish and evaluate where you are. And I want to tell you, it's a really, really great accomplishment. You should feel awesome about it when you've hit this stage. You should celebrate, you should pat yourself on the back, and you should also brace yourself because it's likely that you're going to be extremely discouraged. Films are a process. Film editing is a process, and it's super complicated. Often that first draft is horrible. It will suck, and that's okay. You know, Ed Catmull from Pixar calls this the ugly baby stage. And you're going to look at it and you're going to be expecting it to be beautiful, and you're going to look and say, this is an ugly baby, but it can mature and develop into something great. And I've experienced this before. I experience it often with our short form projects, with our commercials or client work. There's often a point in the post-production phase, usually an early draft, that you look at it and you feel like you made a huge mistake and you've wasted everybody's time and you've wasted everyone's money, and you feel like a fraud and an embarrassment, and you want to crawl in a cave and die. And that happened to us when we were making the feature film A Strange Brand of Happy. We assembled the first full draft, and a few of us who worked on the film got together to watch it and to make some notes, and we're all excited. And we watched it and we were devastated. And I don't know that it's really an overstatement to say that we were really devastated when we saw that first draft. I still remember what it felt like walking away from the screening that evening and feeling like you had let down a ton of people, and that you were terrible at what you loved, and you didn't know that there was a way to fix it. And it's not uncommon if you experience that feeling. But I want to encourage you that you can walk away, take a breath, and realize that there's more work to be done, but that you can salvage it. It can become something beyond a really ugly baby. It can become a beautiful film that you're proud of and an accomplishment. But you're going to have to get in there and keep working at it, and don't give up, don't quit. At this phase, after you've watched your first draft, and maybe whether you watched it alone or just with a couple of other people who worked on the feature film, after you've watched that draft with those people, come together and share your notes, share your feelings. But then you're going to want to think about developing a group of people that can speak into the film, maybe beyond the one or two people that are the most involved with the film that saw the first viewing. You want to develop this trusted group of peers who are going to be able to provide different perspectives from your own. And we do this with our agency. We've done this with our feature films, where we look for folks who we know are trusted, who get the bigger picture, who have some awareness, at least some, if not a lot of awareness and expertise in storytelling and or in production, and writing, who can weigh in, who will provide candid and constructive criticism, who won't hold back too much, but will do it in a respectful, helpful way, and get them and start getting their perspective on things. I know it's gonna feel a lot like getting undressed in front of a room full of people, and you're gonna feel really vulnerable and it's scary, but they're gonna provide really insightful, helpful feedback that's gonna make your film better, and it's gonna help you get through some of those hurdles that you're not sure how to get past. For us, with The Strange Brand of Happy, what resulted was some major switching around and moving and cutting of that first draft. We ended up cutting, I think it was 20-some minutes off that first draft, and we ended up rearranging a couple scenes. One pretty drastic move that we made was what was going to be the next to last scene of the movie got lifted up and put in the middle of the film. And that might sound weird and crazy, but we realized that was something that needed to happen for that story, and it made a big difference. But those were the types of big changes that we had to make to get past our draft sucking and it being something that people could watch and enjoy. As you're looking for those trusted people who are going to speak into your film, I want you to think about them maybe in 3 tiers. There's one tier, this is kind of the inner circle. This is 3 to 5 people, like I said, who you can trust, who have some expertise in this area, whether it be video production or filmmaking or storytelling or writing, maybe acting. Get them together and have them review the draft and look at it and give you feedback. That's tier 1, kind of the inner circle. The next tier is tier 2, where these are folks, maybe they're not quite at the level of expertise as the others, but they have some good awareness. You know that they're going to give you good feedback, and they're still have some level of competency in this area of storytelling and in production. Get them to weigh in as well. Then the third tier is going to be what you might call a buyer persona, or who would be the first person in line to buy a ticket to your film, or the first person that's going to buy a download or to show up at the film festival to watch your film. Now, this is outside of your mom and your best friend who are going to show up to watch the film, but this is the type of person who would really enjoy the type of story that you want to tell. And maybe that's it. They have no expertise in production, they have no expertise in storytelling, but they're just somebody who would probably be a fan of the content. And get a group of like 10 of those kind of people to watch. In between these 3 tiers of people, you're going to take their notes and you're going to start to look for trends and themes. And as they're reviewing it, and you give them, don't just ask them, hey, what'd you think? Or do you like my film? Give them some questions that are going to then prompt them to think about what they just experienced and to give you helpful feedback. So here's some key questions that you're going to want to think about asking them to get you helpful feedback to consider. You're going to want to ask them questions like, what is confusing? What doesn't feel true? What doesn't feel right? What doesn't feel authentic? Was there a moment or a person that made you feel bad or uncomfortable? And then you could ask them, do you have any suggestions? And you can tell them it doesn't have to be specific suggestions, but any broad thoughts or suggestions for them to share with you. Now, when you're receiving this feedback, it's probably going to be hard. It's going to be tough. And you might also want to become defensive and defend what you've done, or explain the hardships and the obstacles that you've come through. Or you may even just want to say, that's not the problem. That's what you're suggesting isn't actually the problem with this. It's not that at all because of this other reason. But take a step back and think about, based on what feedback has been given, are there any trends in the feedback? Are people saying similar things? Now, they may not all say, at minute 73, this person says this line and that line's stupid and I think it all falls apart there. Not everybody's going to say that. But look for the trends. Is everyone identifying, or are most people identifying some sort of problem or discomfort or concern or distraction around the same time, or in the same scene, or with the same character? Look for those trends and things that align, and then think about the problem that's being stated, and then maybe what's the source to the problem that's being stated, and start to look at that. And is there something similar? When you're thinking about the source of the problem, it's not always the direct pain or discomfort that's pointed out. You might be having pain in your neck due to a problem in your lower back. So just because you have pain in your neck, maybe it's not your neck that's the problem. There's something in your back that's causing that neck pain. I look back to a video that I was creating for a nonprofit organization years ago, and when I had finished it, I presented it to somebody at the nonprofit, and their response back was, I like the content and I like how the pacing of it, but it feels cheap. There's something about the look that feels cheap. And I thought, immediately that was very, very offensive to me. I was like, no, this doesn't look cheap. It looks really good. And I'd even taken the time to give it a certain type of color treatment that was trendy at the time. And I thought, no, this isn't cheap. This is actually really sophisticated. I've used this color treatment. The color treatment is really popular right now. This is actually elevating the quality of the video, and it's making your organization look trendy and sophisticated. But once I let go of my ego and I took a step back, I thought, okay, probably the truth here is that it doesn't look cheap. but that doesn't mean that their concern isn't valid. I just got to figure out what's the source of what the problem that they're stating. And obviously it was something about the look, and it was something related to this color treatment that I had done. And I started to evaluate it and tinker with it. I thought, maybe it's that I took the color treatment just a little too far. Maybe it's too extreme. I need to pull back on that. So I started to tinker with the color treatment again. I kept the same basic concept, but I pulled it back just a little bit and massaged it. And then I sent it back to them. And even though I'd only changed maybe 10%, they saw it and they said, "Oh, this is great. It looks awesome. I love how you changed that. It doesn't look cheap anymore. It looks really cool." So for me, I was getting hung up on what I would say is the micro truth of their statement, or what is a really small detail of this looks cheap. And I defend that and say, no, it is not cheap. But if I take a step back and look at the macro truth of what they're saying, I realize there's something about the look to this that isn't being received well. So is there something that needs to change about the look, even though it's not a cheap look? And even though the general idea of that treatment was working, the application of the treatment wasn't quite right. I need to look at that. And just like with that color treatment, it really only needed a 10% change to go from feeling really bad to feeling really good. There are probably many, many things throughout your film that you're going to notice that if you play detective, if you're open to receiving the feedback and looking for the trends and looking to be willing to explore the neighborhood of what the problem might be, you're going to realize that maybe there's some really, really small changes that are going to make a really big difference. For us in Strange Brenda Happy, there was a character that was supposed to be really likable and that the audience should be rooting for. And there was something keeping us from totally buying in and from rooting for her. And we started to hear this from various people, that this one particular character, they're like, yeah, I'm not sure about this character. I don't know if I'm truly rooting for her, or I think she seems this way or that way, negative comments in a particular scene. And so they weren't all saying specifically like, this character is bad throughout the whole movie, or I don't like her at all. There were moments that they were citing or different attitudes where it wasn't a total buy-in completely of her character. And so we started to go back and look at that, and we realized that early on in the film, there was a particular scene or two where one line of dialogue in two different scenes could have been received a little bit off-putting and not really sincere or likable about her character. And when we took those lines out, her likability came up quite a bit. And so out of the course of the whole film, it really only took removing 2 sentences for her likability to increase dramatically. The same thing happened with a different film that we worked on, where again there was a character that should have been very likable, that we wanted the audience to have a lot of empathy for, and some of that wasn't coming through, and we were really concerned that the character was not you weren't going to have empathy for what the character was going through and the challenge that they were going through. And we started to look at, was there anything in the scenes that were off-putting? And again, it came down to a couple of lines and a couple of scenes, or a couple of even facial expressions, that once we removed those, you were much more, had a lot more empathy for that particular character. So I want you to consider those types of things as you're evaluating what small changes can you make. And again, you might need to make big changes like taking 20 minutes out of the film, but what kind of changes can you make? And look for those trends in the feedback and look for, okay, what's the source of the pain? Because there's obviously something in this general area of the film or of this idea that needs to be addressed. After you look for those trends and you start to experiment with edits and addressing those sources of pain for the problems, you want to get in this rhythm of to do a round of revisions, to massage things, and then rest from it. Take a few days off, let your mind rest, let your subconscious process, then come back, look at it again, do some more revisions, do some more massaging, rest. Do that a few times, and once you feel like you've made some significant progress, then go back to those folks and say, can you take a look at this? And whether it's watching the entire film again or watching a scene or a group of scenes, do a few rounds of that where you're going to address, edit, rest, address, edit, rest. Do that a few times. Go back to those folks, get their buy-in, look at the macro truth and the source of the problem, massage that, and do that several times, and it's going to get stronger and stronger as you go. Now, as you're doing that process, I do want to caution you that you don't cut your film too short. Now, in this age where we're streaming and there are lots of different alternative ways to distribute your film, it doesn't necessarily have to be a traditional 90 minutes or more to be a real feature film. But there is something that if you go too short, you might limit your distribution opportunities. You can always self-distribute, and that's a route to go, and so you can make it any length you want. But at the same time, it could be good to try to get as close to 80 minutes as possible. If there are things that you're on the fence about cutting, and that's going to mean it's going to take it well below 80 minutes, then you may want to leave those in. I know for us with one of our films, we had a few different cuts of it as we continued to massage it and wanted to focus on the strongest content and eliminating, cutting any fat that existed with the film. We ended up with our first long cut was 78 minutes. And we also had like a 66-minute cut and a 48-minute cut. And we thought the shorter edits of those were a lot stronger stories and kept the pacing good. And we came to a distributor. The distributor was very interested in the film, wanted to pick it up and distribute it in several different areas. And we mentioned to them, hey, we've got these stronger cuts, and they're a great representation of the story. They're really, really a lot stronger in our mind. And they said, we don't even want to see them. We want the 78-minute cut, because that's what people are expecting, and that's what feels like a real movie. Now, like I said, there are alternatives now. You can sometimes get away with shorter cuts of your film, but unless there's a huge difference in your mind, you're going to want to go with something that's closer to 80 minutes. So consider that as you're editing.